Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenborough, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against Liverpool by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Wilfried Zaha and Mamadou Sakho after the game. So let's begin. Crystal Palace succumbed to a narrow defeat on Merseyside, but the South London side gave the league leaders a serious run for their money in a high-tempo 7-game thriller at Anfield. 2,800 sets of eyes in the Anfield Road end won club legend Julian Speroni, making his 404th start for the club. His early touches were assured, and in the 7th minute, the veteran shot-stopper sprang into life to throw out a great chance from the home side. James Milner's elegant reverse pass on the edge of the box found Joe Matip, who looked to chip the ball over Speroni, but the Argentinian blocked his shot away for a corner. During the first 15 minutes, Liverpool enjoyed 75% possession, and pressure continued to mount on the Palace box. Roberto Firmino's trickery found him space on the left-hand side, but his effort from the edge of the box sailed over Speroni's left-hand post. Moments later, a Milner corner found Sadio Mane, whose header was smothered by Speroni. In the 23rd minute, Aaron Wan-Bissaka was being crowded for space on the halfway line, but he sleekly slipped past the two oncoming Redders before offloading to Luka Milivojevic, whose masterful chip pass released Wilfried Zaha down the right flank. Zaha whipped in a dart of a cross that skimmed Jordan Ayew's head and out of Alisson's box away from danger. Wave after wave of attacks from the home side were met with the typically stubborn and organised Palace defending, creating relatively little cause for concern. Wan-Bissaka's trademark sliding challenges blocked danger on Liverpool's left wing. Van Aanholt kept Milner and co quiet down their right, whilst the central wall of Sakho and Tompkins remained solid. Townsend escaped a penalty shot whilst attempting to clear his lines. The ball attempted to strike his hand on the edge of the box, but it was seemingly unclear as to whether it was Townsend or Mane's hands as the pair were intertwined. The decision went Palace's way. Despite Liverpool's increasing pressure, it was Palace who broke the deadlock after a rapid counter-attack, as Van Aanholt found Zaha on the left, who beat his man and delivered a brilliant cutback cross that landed perfectly at Townsend's left foot, as he rifled it low, first time past Alisson. The away end erupted, the clock silenced. Mohamed Salah went down softly from a Mamadou Sakho challenge as half-time approached, reminiscent of the penalty he won at Selhurst Park earlier on in the season. The referee this time was unmoved, and Palace headed down the tunnel with their slender and hard-fought lead intact. Within a minute of the second half starting, Virgil van Dijk struck a spectacular shot from 30 yards, and it struck James McArthur's hip, changing the ball's direction significantly. It landed in Salah's path on the edge of the 6-yard box, and the Egyptian calmly poked the ball past Speroni. Minutes later, Naby Keita found Firmino in space on the edge of the box, and the Brazilian sidestepped before striking at goal. The ball hit Choku Kouyaté as he flung himself to block, and it trickled agonisingly past Speroni. Now trailing, Palace began to up the ante. Zaha and Van Aanholt combined to create a headache for Liverpool's right side of the defence. On 64 minutes, Milivojevic's deep corner found James Tompkins unchallenged at the back post, and he coolly nodded home. Half of the Anfield Road end erupted, 2-2, game on. Jurgen Klopp was the first to explore options on the bench, with Xherdan Shaqiri replacing Keita with the clock on 71 minutes. Liverpool continued to press, and Milner did well to keep the ball alive on the line, dinking the ball into Speroni's box. Speroni attempted to punch it but was mistimed, and Salah was there to poach home his second of the game on the goal line. 3-2 Liverpool. Hodgson made 3 substitutions in 4 minutes, with Jeffrey Slupp, Max Meyer and Connor Wickham replacing Kouyaté, McArthur and Ayew. With 10 minutes to go, a vicious Van Aanholt free kick found the head of Slupp, but crept just wide. Chances were created at both ends at breakneck speed, as Palace searched for an equaliser. In the chaotic final few minutes, Milner saw red for a second yellow, and Mane struck to make it 4-2, 3 minutes past the 90. Had that been the end of it, the scoreline would have been flattering. But Roy Hodgson's never-say-die side came back once again. Max Meyer scored his first goal in a Palace shirt with a superbly calm finish, but the 5 minutes of allotted time had elapsed. And so it would end 4-3 to Klopp's men. Liverpool's search for a long-awaited Premier League title continues, but make no mistake, Palace gave them one hell of a fright. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. So if you are someone like myself who likes to follow a vast array of Palace accounts on Twitter, and of course you do want another one to follow, then of course do follow us on both our Twitter and Facebook pages at Crystal Palace. And much like every page, we do regularly update it with the latest Palace news. So especially during the January transfer window, we do regularly update it with the latest transfer news. So if you are someone who wants to keep up to date with all things like that, all of our links, all different interviews, all things like that, then of course follow us on there. And obviously, alongside just general news about the club, we also post our own opinion on there. So rather than you waiting for a few days after the game to listen to my opinion in the podcast, we've got a few of us who run the page. So if you do want another place to get an opinion, then of course do head over to our Twitter page, where of course we do regularly update it with our sort of opinion, and especially sort of after the game we give our sort of immediate match reaction, as well as sort of things such as players going out on loan, such as things in terms of the finances of the club. There's all different things that we debate and give our opinion on Twitter. So if you are someone who wants to get involved, as well as someone just who basically wants another place to get all the Palace news, then of course do follow us on there. And occasionally we run polls as well. We've done one recently where we were basically asking everyone when they think we will make our next signing, and when or how many signings they also think we were going to make. So actually, it was really quite interesting to see what people thought. So if you are someone who wants to get involved, just follow us for basically our transfer news, or maybe just general news about the club, then of course follow us at Crystal Palace on both our Twitter and Facebook pages. Now, another great place for you to share your opinion is in YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment of your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, and that's of course 10 being the best. Now, the reason I want you to do that is rather than me having my general opinion of the game, because I'm sure that some aspects of our game were great and some aspects of our performance weren't that great, so I'm sure there's going to be quite a lot of debate about that. So if you are someone who wants to get involved and wants to basically share your opinion with me rather than just coming here and listening to mine, then of course feel free to do that in the comment section below. And like I've said already, obviously I give you my opinion, but I really want to hear and read what you guys have to say. So of course feel free to share that below. And when you consider there's quite a lot of let's say a vast array of different performances in the team for the game against Liverpool, so of course there's going to be quite a lot of discussion there. Now, even if you don't want to do that, because obviously we lost the game, you're not really up to rating all of the players individually, just comment below with your general views of the game, what you thought about the goals we conceded, what you think about the goals and the quality of them, the ones we scored, what you just think about the performance overall. So if you've got anything else you want to share with myself, obviously I read all the comments, or you just want to share it with the world, so any other people who come to the video can not only listen to my opinion but also read the comments as well. So if you are someone who wants to get involved, then of course do feel free to do that. But like I've said already, obviously I give you my opinion, but I want you guys to give me your opinion as well, so I can read it. But also any other fans who come to the video, even if they're Liverpool fans, rather than them just coming to the video and listen to me talk about the game, they can read the comment section and obviously have discussions based upon that as well. And I suppose just put that out there as well, and I've been saying this over the last sort of few weeks or so, if you disagree with anything I say, or you have any questions that you want to ask me, of course feel free to drop them below as well, because I'm sure I answer everyone's questions. So if you do disagree with something I've said, or you just basically want to get in discussion with me, because I personally am always open for having discussions with fans, so if you are someone who wants to get involved in that respect, then of course do feel free to do so. Now, if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've mentioned, or join our Facebook group, then do check all the links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to the player rating, starting in goal with Julian Speroni, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, before I go on to talk about his performance and obviously the reasonings why, or the reasons I've given him a 5, we might as well just, talk about, the last 15 years or so. Julian Speroni's been at the club, absolute club legend, no denying that. But of course, I've given him a 5 here because this game really did show that, yes, he made a few good saves here and there, but it just showed his age, but also it was quite obvious, not just for us, but every sort of football fan, that it was quite obvious that he hasn't necessarily played in over a year. But obviously, put the performance aside and just basically put aside the mistakes he made. We've just got to remember how much of a legend this guy is. Came to the club, didn't really get a chance at first. When he got his chance, obviously cemented his place in the team. And of course, when we went through all the administration and stuff, the fact that he stood by the club and said, actually, I don't really care about the money, I'm here for the club. So for that alone, obviously he deserves respect. But the fact that in this day and age where most footballers don't stay at clubs for longer than a few seasons or so, the fact that we've got someone like Speroni who stayed here as long as he had, and players he had, albeit this game here was slightly damaging to his reputation in the fact that he sort of went out on a sour note. But if you put that aside, he's been a great servant to the club and obviously deserves all of our respect. And I've seen lots of debate on Twitter, people saying we shouldn't criticise him because Obviously, he's a legend. Other people say we do criticise him, albeit a little bit less than we would do other keepers. But whichever side of the argument you are on, you know, he's been an absolute great servant to the club. But obviously, this game here, it was quite obvious that maybe he's just not up to it anymore, which I think is a perfectly valid reason. And he's our third choice goalkeeper for a reason, because he's not quite up to the standards of Hennessy and Gaeta. But also, maybe it's just the fact that he hasn't played in a year. And yes, he's been training, but he hasn't necessarily being that active in the fact that he's been playing games. So maybe it's not the fact that he's just old and he's not necessarily up to it anymore. Maybe it's just the fact that because he hasn't played in a year, he's still a bit rusty. But of course, his performance did leave a lot to be desired, even though he made a few good saves here and there. Obviously, it was disappointing overall. And the fact that we're bringing in, hopefully, touch wood, we're bringing in Lucas Perry on loan and with an option to buy. So he'll probably go as the third choice goalkeeper, which will push Speroni further down the pecking order. But in the meantime, whilst we've got the injuries and, you know, whilst the transfer of the goalkeeper isn't confirmed, we might as well support Speroni. And, you know, as it stands, because the transfer hasn't officially gone through yet, obviously Speroni is probably going to start against Spurs. But until then, we can't really say. Now, in terms of his performance overall, like I've said already, first appearance of the season, so you can understand him being a little bit rusty. But actually, going back to that point I made about actually he did make a few good saves in the game. Quite early on in the game, about the 70th minute or so, Joe Matip's got the ball in the box, had a shot through on goal, and obviously Speroni made himself big and basically raced into the ball, made himself big, and obviously denied Matip. So whilst he made mistakes for the goals, you know, he prevented goals really early on in the game, which of course was quite key because we eventually went to, you know, in that first half went 1-0 up. So actually, looking at it, you could say at that moment in time, a few minutes into the game, that save was obviously quite important. Now, from the resulting corner, from that save, he obviously punched away the ball as well, cleared the danger. So two occasions there where, yes, his performance overall wasn't good, but two key moments there where, of course, he stopped the Liverpool attack. Now, a few moments after that as well, Mohamed Salah once again causing problems for Palace throughout the whole game, but had another chance a few moments later, and obviously Speroni was equal to it again. So, you know, few chances here early on where if he hadn't have made the mistakes, we would have go, actually, quite a competent performance. But, you know, these saves that he made and these punches are not really reflected on really when people look back at the game, mainly because of what happened with the goal, which of course I'm going to talk about. Now, in terms of towards the end of the first half, obviously we were 1-0 up about, I think it's 32 minutes or so that we scored. So, of course, the fact that we were able to see out the rest of the half was, of course, great to see. And the fact that Speroni made a few routine saves just to sort of see out the half was, of course, great to see. So, in terms of his first half performance, you could probably give him a 7 overall. The fact that he made a couple saves, the fact that he denied, you know, Liverpool's best player in Salah on that was great to see. So first half, he was great. But the main reason I've given him a 5 is because of the second half. Now, in terms of the equaliser, you know, there wasn't really anything you could do. You know, Van Dijk's obviously taken a shot from about 30 yards, deflected off MacArthur, and literally fell perfectly to Salah. And because it's literally right in the box, six yards out, so close together, not really anything Speroni can do about that. So the first goal, not really his fault, albeit maybe if he'd stretched a bit more, or maybe if he'd been a little bit more athletic, but considering his age, he probably isn't as athletic as before, but, you know, wasn't quite able to get there. So, but, you know, like I've said already, even though he couldn't get there, I'm not really going to blame him for that goal. And, you know, when you consider it was so early on, the rest of the team hadn't necessarily come out properly for that second half. We were just sitting too deep. We should have actually been looking to actually defend better from that. Because, yes, it was unlucky for us in the fact that he took a deflection right up in the air and fell to Salah. But we shouldn't have found ourselves in a situation why we've literally just started the game a minute into the second half and we give Liverpool so much space. So, of course, a lot to be desired in terms of the build-up to that, but no real blame on Speroni there. Now, in terms of Roberto Firmino's strike, that also took a deflection. I believe it was either Tompkins or Chiarte took a deflection off. Once again, that was mainly the defence's fault for actually letting, I think it was Milner who passed to Firmino, so actually letting him get into the area in the first place. That's obviously, you know, their fault. And, you know, it was such a tight angle that Firmino took the shot from, and the fact that combined that with the fact that he had a deflection. So really, Speroni couldn't really have done much there. But much like the first, he obviously dived the right way, almost got to it, but it wasn't enough. So actually, the first two goals, can't really blame him for that. But obviously, the one why I've given him a 5 overall was just that one at the end, or, you know, the goal to make it 3-1. Obviously, also, you know, it must have been 3-2 at that point, sorry. Didn't really cover himself in glory. Also, obviously Zaha should have been marking Milner better, but I'll go on to that. But obviously Milner's found his way into the area, put in a lovely cross from the byline, and rather than Speroni punching it like he'd done in the first half, and rather than him actually just basically getting the ball out of danger, he's tried to put it behind for a corner, which I'm not sure why he was doing that, because the ball was coming from the side as opposed to right up in front of him. But whatever he's done, you know, he's tried to flick it behind for a corner. or just missed it by a millisecond. The ball's flipped up in the air, and of course Salah scores his easiest goal he will of the season to obviously, you know, make it 3-2. So obviously it was a bit disappointing there. But just going back to that point I said about the fact that he's getting on a bit, he's obviously 39 now, the fact that he's a bit rusty because he hasn't played, that probably all played into his hands. And you know, you look at the first half where he made a fantastic punch to clear the danger. Really, we've got to be questioning why he didn't do that in that occasion, because I'm sure that if he'd actually, rather than trying to dive and flick it over, if he had just sort of stood stationary and tried to punch it and get all of his sort of power behind it, then maybe it would have been a different situation. But you know, all goalkeepers make mistakes, and when you consider Speroni, the career he's had at Palace, he's rarely made a mistake that bad. You know, you look at his first game, I think it was against Everton, you know, back in the day. You look at Everton even last season as well, where he made a mistake. So there's a few games where he's made mistakes, but on the whole he doesn't really make key mistakes like this. So of course maybe we could say he's a bit rusty, or maybe it's just, you know, had one of these days where he made a mistake. But overall, Julian Speroni, you know, yes, his performance weren't great here, but it's not really going to tarnish his reputation because, like I've said already, he's been a fantastic servant for the club. But overall, you know, I do think he had an alright first half, but obviously his second half left a lot to be desired. So do comment below with your thoughts, you know, and also whether you think Speroni will start against Spurs, whether he will start against Southampton, or whether the goalkeeper in Lucas Perry will actually start the game, considering he hasn't actually played a professional game. So do comment below with your views on that. So I'm going to move on now to the first player in our defence, and that is Wan-Bissaka, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, like I say every week, you know, in terms of plays that the fullbacks have to deal with, obviously, you know, no easy task for Wan-Bissaka this week in the fact that he was facing Sadio Mane. Now, when you consider how well he's dealt with numerous players this season, you know, you've got to look back at the games against Man City, the games against Chelsea, you know, games like this where you've got people like Sane, Sterling, Hazard, where actually Wan-Bissaka's done a fantastic job to deal with them. And once again here, albeit Mane did score a goal, and albeit he wasn't necessarily completely restricted in the game, I do think on the whole Wan-Bissaka done a fairly decent job on him, and for that reason that's why I've given him a 7 overall. Now, to be honest, I don't really think it was a surprise I don't really think it was a surprise to see Sadio Mane playing as well as he did, because of course he's had a great season so far, so you can understand him, you know, in the team that's playing at the top of the league. You can understand him really, you know, Wan-Bissaka having his hands full with him, but the fact that he done relatively well in terms of restricting his chances and in terms of basically just making the slide tackles and making challenges like he always does. So the fact that he's up against quality opposition once again and still was able to deal with him well was of course great to see. Now obviously there was a few injuries for Liverpool, so they had to sort of mix up their team a bit, and obviously Naby Keita was one of these players who was playing, you know, in a slightly different position as to where he's been playing you know, this season. Obviously he's been playing a more central role. This one he was playing sort of a more left-handed role, and obviously because of that he was up against Wan-Bissaka. So two players in particular, Sadio Mane, like I've said, has got that pace, got that power, but Wan-Bissaka mostly dealt with him well, and of course Naby Keita as well was causing Wan-Bissaka problems as well. But like I've said, you know, the fact that Wan-Bissaka, like he always does, keeps a calm head, makes fantastic challenges, you know, tackles, blocks, interceptions. The fact that he was able to do that against two players in Mane and Keita was of course great to see. Now, there was one chance in particular where I think, obviously defensively he was good, he made the challenge there, but the thing I really liked is just the fact that how alert he was. So the fact that he was able to see the danger and actually be proactive and actually make that challenge, which of course saw off Keita. So the fact that that opportunity in particular that Keita had to create a chance, the fact that Wan-Bissaka dealt with him so well was of course great to see. Now overall there isn't really much more I can say about his performance, because his main job was obviously to be compact at the back, be tight, make tackles when you have to, and obviously deal with Liverpool's main threats. So the fact that he done that was also helping the back four to stay tight, compact, and basically, you know, executed our game plan almost perfectly if it hadn't have been for these lucky goals with deflections and, you know, mistakes from the goalkeeper. So actually overall you've got to look at his performance and go, it was great, he done what he had to do, and once again it was just another impressive performance from him. You know, I'm really you know, every week now he really struggles to really explain, or basically struggle to actually give words to his performances just because of how good they are. And you know, this game was no different in the fact that he's very good defensively. So Aaron Wan-Bissaka here, another good performance defensively. You know, really impressed with how he's been playing this season, but this game in particular, and that was mainly due to the fact that how well he dealt with Sadio Mane and of course Naby Keita when he was posing a threat down that side as well. So Wan-Bissaka here, a 7 for him. So I'm going to move on now to our first centre-back, and that is James Tomkins, who I am going to give a 7 overall. Now, going back to what I said with Wan-Bissaka and the fact that he had to deal with Naby Keita, Tomkins was one of the other players who was involved quite a lot with Keita, and there was one moment in particular in the first half that I really want to highlight, and that's just that, you know, obviously Keita was one of Liverpool's better players, not the best, but one of their better ones, and of course he had a few chances going forward. So the fact that Tomkins made this one superb challenge on Keita in that first half was of course great to see. Now we know how good Tomkins is and how reliable he has been, but the thing that makes him such a good and reliable player for us is just the fact that yes, he can consistently be good, but when he's actually called upon to make an important challenge, he can actually make that. And that's exactly why I wanted to highlight this, because it was a superb challenge on Keita. If he hadn't have made it, then maybe, you know, Liverpool would have created a chance, albeit maybe not scored from it, but maybe it would have created a chance. So the fact that Tomkins was alert defensively to make that challenge was of course great to see. Now on the whole, even though we conceded 4 goals, I think on the whole Tomkins and Sakho in particular done a fantastic job at defending. And you know, I've talked about recently the fact that Tomkins, he seemed to, as the sort of, especially through December, he seemed to get better and better at corners. You know, he started off the month by actually looking to get on that far post and whip the ball back in by headering it through on goal. Then, you know, a few weeks ago, he started actually having chances where, he, like he used to 2-3 seasons ago, where he actually looked to attack the ball into the far post. So there were signs that he was looking to improve and looking to score from corners. So of course it was nice for him to get on the score sheet with what was a fantastic delivery by Luka, and obviously the fact that Tomkins removed himself from all of the bunch of players on the penalty spot, moved himself to the far post, and obviously was able to head it into that far post away from the goalkeeper. So the fact that Tomkins had a fairly decent performance, aside from the goals we conceded, because they're not really his fault. So aside from the goals, and you put the goals aside, I actually thought he defended well, got the goal that he deserved, considering how much of a threat he's been from set pieces recently. And really, looking at the game as a whole, I can't really pinpoint any mistakes he made. And you know, for that, when you have a player playing as well as that, he doesn't really deserve to be on the losing side. And that's really been a theme of our season so far. You know, you've got to look at people like Tomkins, Wan-Bissaka, Sakho. These are players who are always playing well defensively, but don't necessarily get what they deserve from the game. And this game was once again a game where Tomkins played really well defensively, but because of the first 2 goals, you know, they took deflections. The other one was a mistake from Speroni, and another one was just a good counter-attack goal near the end of the game. So aside from that, I do think as a defensive partnership, Sakho and Tomkins done well, but individually, hence why I've given them a 7, I do think Tomkins done really well. So Tomkins here, another solid performance from him, and hopefully he could carry that on in the next few weeks. So I'm going to move on now to his centre-back partner, and that is Mamadou Sakho, who I'm also going to give a 7 overall. Now in terms of Sakho's performance, you know, I could talk much like what I said with Tomkins in the fact that he was fairly solid throughout the game, done what he had to do, restricted Liverpool, and essentially was just being that rock at the back which he has been all the season. So of course I could go on repeating about that, but really I want to move aside from that defensive side of his game, because I just think the way he played, the fact that he was so calm in the game, and the fact that that seemed to reflect on the whole team, was something that I was really impressed with. Now of course we could talk all day about our performance, but we'd also talk all day about the absolute fantastic threat that Liverpool have, how fantastic their players. So the fact that when you've got that pressure, that constant onslaught, and the fact that they had loads of possession, so the fact that we had that constant threat from Liverpool, the fact that Sakho was able to be calmness personified, let's say, as you say, the fact that he was able to do that was of course great to see. Now in terms of moments in the game, you know, people may say sometimes he can be a bit reckless, and certainly we've seen that recently, but he's been able to make up for it. But in this game here, he was able to do his clever tricks and skills, which he always likes to do, but the fact that he was able to do it so calmly whilst also not being punished for it was the thing that made it even better. Now within the first sort of few moments or so, it's a fantastic sort of drag back and flick inside his own area, where of course there was a few Liverpool players around him, and you know, that really seemed to sort of pump him up on his return to Anfield. Now of course players, they go back to their former club and sometimes it can affect them, but that one moment of skill really early on in the game, the fact that he was able to pull it off by actually dragging the ball back and flicking it and getting, I think, giving it to Tomkins. So the fact that he was able to stay calm, produce such a skill, really seemed to settle him down in the game. And you know, people always go, oh, he's a maverick, or he sometimes makes us a bit nervous. Yes, that's true, but as shown here against Liverpool, when it actually works and we're able to actually get the ball out of the area without actually hoofing it, that is something that really is quite important. Now in terms of important moments in the game, going back to that, like I said with Tompkins, Tompkins was just that rock at the back and really was solid in terms of stopping Liverpool. But the fact that Sakho, like he always does, made a number of important blocks to actually just thwart Liverpool's attacks. Not just make a tackle, get the ball away, and then Liverpool retain possession. The fact that we were able just to stop them in their tracks so well was of course great to see. Now, much like what I said with Speroni and the fact that his first half performance was really great, his performance in the first half and the second half was good, but in the first half in particular, where we had that constant onslaught by Liverpool especially before we scored our first goal, the fact that he remained a rock in that time because of that constant pressure was of course great to see. And much like what I said with Tompkins, in the fact that his performance was so good and he probably didn't deserve to be on the losing side, I suppose you could say the same for Sakho again. And if he hadn't have fallen out with the manager and if he hadn't come to Palace, then maybe he'd still be at Liverpool, and maybe the goals we conceded, or the goals we scored against Liverpool, maybe they wouldn't have conceded if they had Sakho in the side, because I do really think that his performance there was really great and certainly didn't deserve to be on the losing side. But overall, much like what I said with James Tompkins, I'm going to really repeat for Mamadou Sakho. Main reason I've given him a 7 is just because of how calm he was on the ball, how good he was in possession as well. And you've just got to look back at our first goal we scored. Obviously the counter attack was good, and the fact that MacArthur got the ball forward to Zaha, and Zaha's got to the byline and put a fantastic cross into Townsend. Obviously that's great, but our build-up play and the fact that we were able to pass the ball out from the back, Tompkins in particular, but Sakho on a few other occasions done similar things, but the fact that we were able to be so calm and actually just pass the ball around to actually break down that Liverpool press. They were literally just pressing us, so we were just passing the ball around quite calmly at the back, despite them putting so much pressure on us, and that resulted in us, going forth to score the goal. So even though the first goal we conceded didn't actually involve Sakho, the fact that he was involved in similar bits of play later on in the game with that calmness he has on the ball is of course great to see. So I do think overall a 7 is a fair result. So now I'm going to move on to the final player in our back four, and that is of course the left back Patrick Van Aanholt, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, much like what I said with Wan-Bissaka and the fact that normally the fullback has one player in particular who of course they have to deal with, it was slightly different in this game here for Van Aanholt in the fact that he didn't necessarily have one player from Liverpool in particular that he had to deal with, but I do think on the whole he done a relatively good job in terms of at specific times in the game where he had to deal with certain players. The fact that he was able to do that, as opposed to actually concentrating purely on one player, the fact that he was able to do that quite efficiently as well was of course great to see. Now, obviously, wasn't really expecting much sort of competition, mainly in terms of the attacking threat, because normally Liverpool they play with a few wide players, so you're not really going to expect too many players to attack you. So of course, because Mane was attacking Wan-Bissaka's side, obviously there was a little bit less pressure on Van Aanholt's side of the pitch, mainly because there wasn't one player in particular going down that side. Now, I may have made that sound a little bit more complicated than it is, but essentially Wan-Bissaka had Mane for the majority of the game to deal with, whereas Van Aanholt didn't necessarily have one player in particular who he was literally in direct competition throughout the game. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense than that sort of tangent I was going on. But essentially, Wan-Bissaka obviously defended well, as did Van Aanholt, but the fact that Van Aanholt actually done a more broader job in the fact that he wasn't focusing on one player and was still able to maintain a high level of his defensive work rate was of course great to see. Now, much like what I said with quite a lot of players, in that first half, when obviously Liverpool were playing quite well, I do think Van Aanholt, you've got to give him credit, because I think he coped really well with that constant onslaught from Liverpool, and albeit he wasn't necessarily as effective as he has been recently, especially going forward, the fact that he just done his job defensively, albeit not necessarily concentrating on one player, but the fact that he was able to restrict Liverpool and basically stop them in their tracks, especially in that first half. Liverpool have been scoring goals fun this season, so the fact that we actually went a whole 45 minutes without conceding the goal was of course really impressive for the whole back four. But I suppose Wan-Bissaka and Van Aanholt in particular, when you consider Liverpool have that pace and have that overlapping ability from the fullbacks, the fact that we were able to deal with that relatively well was of course great to see. But the main reason I've given him a 6 as opposed to a 7 that I've given to the rest of the back four is just the fact that he didn't really impress me as much as the others. Now, that's not to say that I'm saying he had a bad game, it's just the fact that Sakho and Tompkins making challenges, making blocks. Tompkins got the goal, Wan-Bissaka
dealing with Mane by making these tackles and challenges. So whilst Van Aanholt done a relatively good job defensively, there wasn't necessarily anything stand out from his game, and that's both defensively in terms of making that telling tackle, but also going forward as well. So I do think overall a pretty average performance from him, you know, not a bad performance, but nonetheless a performance where he probably could have done more both defensively and offensively. But like I said already, people could go on and talk about his performance all day because I'm sure there's different views, but like I've said already, you know, he put in a competent performance defensively. Probably could have done a little bit more offensively, especially sort of when we were chasing the game 4-2. Obviously we went on to make it, score another goal, make it 4-3, but at that point, even at 3-2, at that point we want to try and get back into the game, and maybe if we had a little bit more pressure from the likes of Van Aanholt actually proving and providing that sort of overlap, then maybe something different could have happened. But overall, Patrick Van Aanholt, obviously the final player in our defence, I do think a 6 is a fair result. So obviously in this game here, like many games against the top four this season, we obviously play with a 4-5-1, and obviously that means that Andros Townsend was playing on the right hand side of our midfield. Now in terms of his performance, I'm going to give him a 7 overall, and the main reason for that is because he seems to be a guy who seems to relish games against the top 6, I want to say top 6, and once again, this big occasion here, the fact that he just seemed to step up and actually perform well was of course great to see. Now of course when we went up north to Manchester City, obviously in December, he obviously scored that fantastic goal. So the fact that he once again went to a team in the top 4 and scored a great goal, albeit not a volley from 30 yards, but actually a great cutback from Wilfried Zaha, and the fact that he hit it first time. So the fact that he, you know, scored once again a great goal against top opposition was of course great to see. Now albeit it was quite a simple finish in comparison to the Man City one. Obviously the Man City one, ball was bubbling around in the box, the ball's come to him 30 yards from goal, he's hit it, gone top corner. This one was just quite a simple ball on the counter attack, Wolf got to the byline, cut it back, and the fact that he hit it first time into the goal. So although it was fairly simple, and of course it broke deadlock, so it was important, even though it was simple, the skill he's got to actually, even though he's playing on the right hand side of midfield, the fact that he had that ability and that awareness to drift inside, position himself in the centre of the box, almost on the penalty spot, to get in the right position, whilst also having that composure to actually turn, hit it first time as well. So the fact that he got everything about his forward play in terms of the goal, especially in terms of his forward play. So the fact that in particular he was able to do was really what was quite impressive. And you know, you've got to really argue now that he's got to be up there as one of our players of the season, not just because of his attacking contribution, but the goals he seems to be scoring are really quite crucial ones. And yes, we didn't go on to win the game, but at that point, 0-0, we're thinking, oh, we can hold on for a 0-0 here at half time, this could be great. And you know, maybe we could have conceded in the second half, but at that point we're thinking, well, we'll get ahead and maybe we'll have a chance in this game. And albeit we eventually went on to lose the game, as opposed to a game like Chelsea where, you know, we didn't really attack them. This was a game where we actually attacked Liverpool, and albeit we still lost, the fact that we still got 3 goals against the top opposition was of course great to see. And I do think Townsend in particular has done a great job, not just because of the goal he scored, but actually his overall offensive play was really good. Now in terms of, I talked about our fullbacks having to deal with players, Andy Robertson was the player who, you know, primarily had to deal with Andros Townsend, and whilst Robertson's had a fantastic season, you know, at left back, I do think that because he was going so far forward in this game, it obviously left space in behind, and that's one of the reasons why I thought that not just Townsend but our attacking players in particular done so well. And that's not to say that Robertson had a bad game, because I do think, much like all of the Liverpool players, he actually had a fairly decent game, but because he was going forward so much, it just left spaces in behind, and people like Townsend were just exploiting that left, right and centre. So albeit Townsend on another day, if Robertson had been a little bit more cautious in terms of his positional play, then maybe Townsend wouldn't have had the freedom he had. But like I've said already, you know, if you have an opposition with playing such a high press, by having fullbacks overlapping, if you can exploit that and get in behind and actually cause problems for the opposition like Townsend did, then of course that's going to be great to see. Now obviously Townsend on his own was a fantastic attacking threat, but when you've got someone like Wan-Bissaka as well, especially in that second half, actually helping you as well, which obviously meant that, you know, because Wan-Bissaka was going forward as well, it meant that Townsend didn't necessarily have to do all the running, and he could basically sacrificed some of his attacking runs to get involved a little bit more in a rather attacking play. So the fact that not only was he good offensively and the fact that he got the goal, but the fact that he was also able to get involved in our play because someone like Wan-Bissaka was just providing that support as well down that flank was of course great to see. So for me overall, the main reason I've given him a 7 is because he scored a goal in an important time in the game. And yes, we didn't go on to win the game, but nevertheless, the fact that he scored yet another goal against a top 4 side, obviously top of the league, and the fact that the goal was obviously of great quality, and the fact that he was able to drift inside, get in the right position, then turn and hit it first time. So everything about the goal was great, but I do think overall, aside from the goal, his offensive performance was once again very good. So now I'm going to move on to our central midfield, starting with Cheikhou Kouyaté, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now in terms of Kouyaté's performance, and this is something I've said over the last few weeks or so, but he's been one of our most consistent and certainly one of our most important players in the last few weeks or so, and that's just mainly because of how good his play in the midfield has been. Now obviously against Liverpool, because they are such a better side than us, because they had so much possession in the game, obviously meant that our midfield didn't necessarily have the freedom that they did have or have had in games gone by, but I still think nonetheless actually Kouyaté put in a fairly decent performance, albeit I've given him a 6 because it wasn't necessarily as good as his other games have been this season, but also he wasn't as good as some of his midfield counterparts, who of course I go on to. But much like what I said with quite a few players, and the fact that in the first half in particular we were playing really good, I was really impressed with Kouyaté in that first half, and that's just mainly because in terms of stopping Liverpool, I think he done a fantastic job in terms of just shutting the middle of the park and basically making it difficult for them to attack down the middle and actually get into our final third. Now admittedly, we did spend the majority of that first half in particular actually just camped in our own half, but when you've got someone like Kouyaté with that tenacity and with that power and physicality in the midfield, when you've got someone like that playing in down the middle who can actually stop the opposition, it really does make a difference. Now, albeit Liverpool had so much possession, and I do think that, the first 15 minutes or so they had 75%, so that really goes to show how dominant Liverpool were. But when you've got someone like Kouyaté working hard in that middle of the park to actually get the ball out wide, also put crosses into the box as well, so the fact that you've got someone in the middle of the park doing his good work, doing really good midfield and defensive work, whilst also actually allowing when he got the ball out wide, he was able to put crosses into the box as well. So the fact when obviously he put a few balls in the box, but actually in terms of stopping Liverpool put balls into the box, obviously got a bit confused there, but in terms of actually stopping Liverpool, that thing in particular, in terms of actually playing so well down the middle that you have to push them out wide, where someone like Wan-Bissaka or Van Aanholt will deal with them. So the fact that Kouyaté done that very, very well, whilst also on the few occasions he did get the ball, he was able to pass it forward, not necessarily just put crosses into the box, but actually get the ball forward. So the fact that he combined that midfield play both defensively and offensively to his game was of course great to see. Now, obviously, much like a few players, the main reason I've given him a 6 as opposed to a 7 is just because in that second half he wasn't necessarily as good as he was in the first, and I just think that's mainly because he was so impressive in that opening period, probably a 7 out of 10. The fact that he just weren't able to maintain that high level of performance immediately after the break, when we conceded that first goal, when we conceded the second as well, which took a deflection off him. So the fact that he wasn't quite able to maintain that really high level that he set was of course a little bit disappointing, especially when Liverpool took the lead off the back of, Kouyaté actually, rather than getting a block in, actually taking that deflection on the ball. But actually, put that aside, I do think he had a fairly good performance, and albeit it was a game of two halves, I do think he done enough in both halves to actually warrant the 6 overall. And maybe some people will disagree, they think maybe he deserves a 7 for his performance, but I do think on reflection, yes, his first half was good, second half was a bit not as good, so I do think 6 overall is a fair result. But in terms of his overall play, that first half in particular, he was very, very impressive. And one of the reasons why we went in 1-0 up at half time was because of how well he played in midfield, in the fact that he was able to stop the opposition. But like I've said already, in terms of his importance in the team, it was just because the reason he was so important is the fact that just how well he'd done in the middle of the park. Now, yes, I got a bit confused and said he put crosses into the box. What I meant to say is he obviously played so well in the midfield that he actually forced the Liverpool players to go out wide and put crosses into the box. Now, yes, he put balls forward, he was carrying the ball forward, but actually what I meant to say is he was obviously stopping Liverpool put crosses into the box in the first place. So I do think overall, Cheikhou Kouyaté, another good performance from him, albeit not necessarily to the levels we've seen of him this season, but I suppose that's what you expect when you set such high standards. But I do think overall a 6 is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to the captain, and that is Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. And now I suppose, much like what I said with the back four and the centre-backs in particular, I suppose I could repeat quite a lot of the same points for our central midfield, and that's just because as a midfield partnership, or even as sort of I suppose you could say sort of parts of the pitch. So in terms of our 3 units in the side, so your defensive unit, your midfield unit, and obviously your forward unit, in terms of that midfield unit, they actually worked really, really well together. And that's one of the reasons why I could say similar things about Luka than I would do about someone like MacArthur, for example. Now, in terms of this game here, in that first half, once again going back to that first half, I don't think Luka put a foot wrong in that game, or barely put a foot wrong. So like I've said already, Liverpool constantly putting pressure on us so early on into the game. So the fact that we had someone like Luka, people like Kouyaté, people like Sacco and Tompkins as well, and obviously Wan-Bissaka as well, the fact that we had these people to keep a cool head, so early on in the half was of course great to see. And when you've got players like Luka who are barely putting a foot wrong and actually not putting us under pressure because they're playing so well and they're not making mistakes which are obviously basically gift the opposition the ball. So the fact that we were able to do that and do it so well was of course great to see. Now of course in the midfield I don't think we made many mistakes and didn't really put a foot wrong, but I do think in particular Luka, obviously you want him to be the main man on the pitch, your guy who's the captain commanding the side. So the fact that we've got someone like him playing as well as he did, not allowing Liverpool the opportunities to take advantage of our mistakes, was of course great to see. Now to be honest, I'm not really going to dwell too much on the goals we conceded. Obviously lost the game 4-3, but of course 2 of the goals at least that we scored took deflections and were quite lucky, and the other ones obviously would be disappointed, Speroni in particular, for making that mistake. Now of course I'm sure Luka will be disappointed as anyone that we sort of let that lead slip, but the fact that he was able to make up for the fact that we went 2-1 down by putting in that fantastic delivery to Tompkins, right to the far post, for Tompkins to score the equaliser to make it 2-2, was of course a really great way of making amends. So whilst he wasn't necessarily directly involved for the goals we conceded, you could argue as a midfield unit we probably should have closed down the players sooner, because that probably wouldn't have allowed someone like Virgil van Dijk to have a shot from 30 yards. But nevertheless, obviously him and the rest of the team would have been disappointed, but the fact that he made up for that by putting such a pinpoint delivery into the box was great to see. And obviously we scored from, obviously discounting the goal last week, because that doesn't really count, an own goal. Aside from that, we've actually had, we've actually finally scored our first goal from a corner this season, which just goes to show I've been criticising it so much this season in terms of our deliveries into the box haven't been great. We've been a bit too static, and players have been heading wide left, right and centre. So finally it was nice for us to actually get the ball in the box and actually finish off the chance. So whilst Tompkins' header was great, the delivery from Luka was of course even better. Now moving into the second half, I think Luka was just as good, and that's the reason why I've given him the 7, because unlike Kouyaté, he was actually able to maintain that high level of performance. Now one of the main reasons for that is just because he made a number of important challenges in the game, and I suppose going back to the 2 centre-backs in particular, yes we conceded 4 goals, but the reason I was impressed with them is just because of the sheer amount of challenges and blocks they were making in the game. So the fact that you've also got someone in the midfield in Milivojevic actually making these tackles as well to actually stop the attack of Liverpool before they actually get into our own box was of course great to see. Now obviously towards the end of the game we were obviously trying to, especially at 3-2, we were trying to get back into the game, and obviously we were in quite a lot of danger of being counter-attacked, and certainly we saw with Mane's goal in the fact that we were pushing to get an equaliser, they scored. But the fact that Luka, for the majority of the rest of the game, where we were obviously at danger quite a lot of being caught in the counter-attack, the fact that he actually still was able to make these important challenges, especially when we were so sort of naive. I don't want to say we were naive, but we were trying to push to get that equaliser, especially during that part of the game. The fact that Luka stood strong and was able to make these number of important challenges was of course great to see. So I do think overall a 7 is a fair result, when you consider how combative he was in the midfield, both defensively and of course his offensive work in terms of putting deliveries from set pieces. But like I've said already, can't really fault him for the goal, and just the sheer amount of effort he put into his midfield performance in terms of just stopping Liverpool and basically making it as difficult for them as possible was of course great to see. So I do think the captain Luka Milivojevic does deserve this 7 I've given him. So I'm going to move on now to the final player of our midfield three, and that is of course James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, obviously, McArthur's been one of these players who's divided opinion quite a lot this season, and certainly in the last sort of few games or so where he's been keeping Max Meyer on the bench. But the reason I've given him a 7 here is that, even though people were criticising him and didn't really want him to start, I actually think he put in a very good shift for the side, like he always does, and that's the reason I've given him a 7. Now, like I said already, before kick-off, quite a lot of us were wondering why he wasn't started, and albeit I understood that Roy Hodgson likes to stick with him because he's a workhorse, he works hard for the team, I obviously said on Twitter, actually, this team is sort of lacking a bit of creativity in midfield, and probably would have been better to start Max Meyer. Now, of course, Roy Hodgson, ultimately, we didn't necessarily need Max Meyer's attacking contribution till right at the end of the game, because we have people like Zaha, like Townsend, who were able to create stuff on the counter-attack. So, albeit we still had that creativity, the reason why people were questioning it is because we really lacked that creativity in midfield. But the fact that, even though he was ahead of the team and most people didn't want him in the team, the fact that he still put in such a good performance, much like Luka, putting himself about a bit in midfield, actually getting involved, making it difficult for Liverpool. So the fact that he was able to do that and do it so well as well was another thing that really did impress me. Now, in terms of a word to use, I'll just use disciplined, because I do think his performance was exactly that. Sometimes you could think against opposition like this, you might make a rash challenge or do something you shouldn't have. But the fact that Luka, as did the whole midfield, stayed calm, stayed composed, and dealt with the threat from Liverpool as well as they did was of course great to see. And of course, albeit his performance was so good, he rightly got taken off towards the end of the game. Not because he was necessarily playing bad, it's just the fact that we had an option with Max Meyer on the bench who could give us that creativity to help us get back into the game, 3-2 at that point. And certainly, albeit we still lost the game, Max Meyer went on and scored a goal. So you could argue that was actually a good sub in the end. But overall, James McArthur here, giving him a 7, because I can't really fault him. As I could say with the whole midfield, can't really fault him for anything on the game. And, certainly there was a lot of debate before the game as to whether he'd start. But in the end, it seemed like a right decision because of his work rate. That really seemed to help us, especially in that sort of first half where we were under the cosh for the majority of the game. So I do think James McArthur here does deserve this 7 I've given him. So now I'm going to move on to the final player in our midfield, and that is of course the winger Wilfried Zaha, who I'm going to give an 8 overall. Now, much like what I said with a few players in terms of, talking about their first half and talking about their second half, Zaha was certainly one of the players who wasn't necessarily as effective in that first half as he was in the second half. And that's sort of the opposite of quite a lot of our players in the team. You look at people like Luka, you look at people like Kiarte, even our defence, the back four in particular, they had a lot better first halves than they did have second half, and that's just because of how well Liverpool were playing. Now, Zaha is a complete opposite to that, and that's just mainly because of how much under the cosh we were, because we were defending so well, we weren't necessarily able to get the ball forward. But also the plus side of that, or I suppose the negative side of that, is just because of how well Liverpool were also defending. So when you consider the fact that we were defending well, and we were basically contained in our own half, when you combine that with the fact that we weren't necessarily able to actually get forward as well, that really seemed to affect Zaha. But the reason I've given him an 8 is because the main reason is because of how he persevered, and mainly because of how good his second half was as well. Now, like I've said already, obviously I could talk about Liverpool all day in terms of restricting us, basically playing such a high press that it made it difficult for us at times. But actually, one of the main reasons in particular Zaha didn't do well is just because we didn't see the ball. So we could talk about our defensive work and the fact that we were just getting rid of the ball, not really looking to get stuff on the counter-attack, and the fact that obviously Liverpool were playing well as well. But actually, I do think on the other side of that, you've got to look at it and go, mainly just because of how good Liverpool were playing, we basically didn't have that time on the ball. And one of the sort of downsides of that is the fact that we can't get the ball to people like Zaha. So, you look at the first 15 minutes or so, I think Liverpool had 15% of the possession, and that just really goes to show how dominating they were. So when you haven't got the ball, your attacking players are going to suffer, and certainly that was the case here. But he slowly did grow into the game, and when he sort of switched to right wing, even though the assist that he gave to Andrew Townsend was from the left wing, when he actually switched to that right wing, he seemed to get into the game a lot more and seemed to be a lot more effective. Now, albeit his best bit of play came from the left hand side, I do think the main moment where it sort of clicked for him and it actually made a difference was actually when he started playing on that right hand side. But like I've said already, before I go on to talk about that, I might as well talk about the goal itself. And I talked about Townsend and the fact that he was positioning, it was great, and the fact that he was able to get into the area and actually were able to spin and hit it first time. Yes, that was all great, but that sort of situation wouldn't have happened if it weren't for Zaha carrying the ball forward. Now, there was a great video on Twitter, which obviously has got taken down for copyright, but that was our goal, and it really just epitomised how good the attack was. Now, it wasn't just the fact that Zaha got to the byline, or it wasn't just the fact that Townsend actually shot it in, but actually the whole build-up to the goal was fantastic. You know, from people like Tompkins and MacArthur passing the ball around at the back, you know, avoiding that high press of Liverpool. And then you've got MacArthur playing the ball out wide to someone like, I think it was Vanano who passed the ball to Zaha. So the fact that all of the team were involved in that by passing the ball around, avoiding that high press of Liverpool, that was obviously great to see. And the fact that Zaha was able to finish it off by actually putting that play, you know, basically putting it on the plate for Andros Townsend to score was of course great to see. So a brilliant cutback, and the main reason he was able to do that cutback is, once again, goes back to that point, you know, Liverpool's fullbacks were playing so high up the pitch. So when you've got someone like Zaha, who's about you know, I'm going to say 10 times faster than James Milner, when you've got, maybe exaggeration, but when you've got a player who's much faster than you, and you're leaving space in behind, Zaha's going to exploit it, and that's exactly what he did. Run past James Milner with ease, put the ball into the area, and of course Townsend done the rest. So obviously the build up to the goal was great, but actually that power to actually make that run into the box, and obviously that ability to put in such a pin perfect cross for Townsend as well was of course great to see. Now, of course, you know, I think the last 12 games he hasn't been involved in a goal, you know, both scoring or assisting. So actually it was nice for him to get that assist that's long eluded him. And you know, if you look back at the penalties he scored this season, he should have a lot more assist than he already has, but of course that's a debate for another day. But the fact that he finally got something to show for his good performances, because you know, before December he was having quite an off season, wasn't necessarily getting involved that much, and that's just because he was playing as a single striker. That really seemed to limit him. So the fact that we're now playing him in his more natural position for the last sort of 3 or 4 games or so, it really seems to have brought him back to how he used to be. And yes, that was great, but he didn't necessarily have that end product. So the fact that he was able to do what he's been doing in recent weeks and finally add the end product by getting that assist for Andros Townsend was of course great to see. Now, in terms of our second half, obviously we ultimately quite early on got that sucker punch to make it 1-1 with 1 minute into that second half, but I do think Zaha in particular wasn't really phased by that, and that's the reason I've given him the 8. Obviously his attacking play and the fact that he got the assist was great, but the fact that he persevered when we went 2-1 down and actually just continued to be a threat and continued to basically look up for that the fight in that second half was the thing that really did impress me. Now, of course, in the first half he absolutely ripped Milner to shreds for the first goal we scored, and he kept doing that continuously in that second half. Now, mainly it's got to be down to Milner. Obviously the fact that he was playing so high up the pitch, and because he's slow, obviously meant that Zaha got past him quite a lot of the time. But aside from that, it was just because of how good Zaha was. He was constantly putting pressure on him, constantly using his pace and his skill to his advantage to run at Milner. And ultimately, because he had him on toast, he eventually got him sent off. You know, Milner, albeit he knew it was coming because he made a stupid challenge. But, you know, when you're on a yellow card, you shouldn't really be making them challenges. And of course, you've got to give credit to Zaha, because if it wasn't for Zaha actually just causing him so much problems, then maybe Milner hadn't have got sent off. But the fact that Zaha made it so difficult for Milner that he actually had to attempt to take him down and ultimately found him, you know, we've got to say on the day, albeit we still went on to lose the game, rightly deserved the red card, and just goes to show how good and how much of a threat Zaha was in the fact that he made life so difficult that, you know, he forced players to make stupid challenges and eventually get sent off. Now, once again, like I said with the back four, you know, Zaha's one of these players who was actually quite unlucky to be on the losing side, because I do think if you combine his assist he got with just his general attacking play, you've got to be looking at his performance going absolutely outstanding. And, you know, there's been a few people criticising what Jurgen Klopp said on in his post-match press conference, but he basically said Zaha, not really surprised at what he did, he's world class forward. And, you know, yes, he may not be, you know, the Hazards or the Neymar or the Messi of this world, but he's still a very high-class player. And, you know, when you've got managers like, you know, Jurgen Klopp, who's top of the league, when you've got players like him, or managers like him actually praising your own players, really just goes to lengths to show how good Zaha is. And for me personally, obviously I've criticised Zaha quite a lot this season in the fact that he hasn't necessarily been up to the standards he's been at previous seasons, but the fact that the last few games or so he's been able to pick him up and he finally got something to show with it, with the assist, was really great to see. And, you know, I suppose the phrase you could use is back to his best, because certainly that's what I felt was Zaha's performance. So once again, I'm going to give him an 8 because his general attacking play was good, and the fact that he combined that by, you know, actually getting the good assist that he did, was also actually just being so much of a threat that he actually caused James Milner to get sent off. For that alone, you know, combined with everything else, I do think he does deserve the 8 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the final player in our starting 11, and that is of course the striker Jordan Ayew, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, much like what I said with a few players in the fact that they had fairly good performances, but there isn't necessarily too much to pick out from their performance, and that's just because they had a fairly competent performance and they essentially just executed that game plan so well that there's not really too much to say. And I suppose that's much the same for Jordan Ayew, and that's one of the reasons I've given him a 6. Now, obviously quite early on in the game he got booked for a late challenge on Jordan Henderson, obviously, you know, quite needless in the fact that he didn't necessarily have to make that challenge, but then looking back at the game, you know, it didn't seem to affect the rest of his play, and he didn't have to be too careful because he's not normally one known for making challenges. So aside from actually getting that booked for that challenge, which I suppose is the only real negative of his performance, I do think that actually he worked hard up top, you know, pressing that back four. And you know, when you consider Liverpool play such a high press, when we were able to counter that by actually giving our own high press with people like Ayew, Zaha and Townsend, by actually just putting pressure on the Liverpool back four, that really seemed to play into our hands. Now, of course, Liverpool dominated the majority of the game, and of course, you know, our press wasn't necessarily the most effective it could have been. But when you've got people like Ayew, who's not necessarily being that effective with what he's doing, but he's just giving his all, putting in a lot of effort, that's the thing that really does matter. Now, obviously up front, he's not the tallest, so I suppose when on the few chances we actually got to counter-attack, when it weren't the likes of Townsend in the box, who obviously connected with Zaha's ball into the box, you know, I do think Ayew sort of suffered in the fact that he didn't necessarily hold up the ball well. But like I said already, you know, put that aside, I do think the fact that he worked hard up top, putting pressure on the back four, and also just looking to get involved, you know, coming back into his own third, looking to get involved as well. So the fact that he was doing that, albeit not necessarily the most effective, was of course great to see. But the main reason I've given him a 6 is just because even though he worked hard, the fact that he got booked for that late challenge, and the fact that he wasn't necessarily as good as with his hold-up play than he has been previously, that was sort of the thing that did let him down. But like I've said already, can't really fault him for too much in the game because, you know, other than I think a header chance he had wide, I don't really think there's really much of note to say more about him. So I do think overall, Jordan Ayew, I do think a 6 is a fair result. But do comment below whether you think Christian Benteke or Connor Wickham might come and replace him in the next few weeks. Because when you consider, you know, Connor Wickham, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, he came off the bench and actually made a difference. So maybe, you know, maybe Jordan Ayew, who's, yes, works hard but not good at hold-up play, maybe someone like Wickham or Benteke will come back into the side because they're slightly better at that. But overall, I do think a 6, overall, it's a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to these 3 substitutions we made, obviously the first of them being Jeffrey Schlupp. Obviously, I'm going to give him a 6 overall, and that's basically, he came on the pitch, obviously helped us to see the game out, and albeit we still went on to lose the game, I think he came on at 3-2. Even though that was the case, he basically just came onto the pitch just to help us see the game out and just basically give us fresh legs, because Liverpool will bring people like Shaqiri, who we know always scores against us. So when you bring in players like that on, we've got to be proactive, and albeit Roy Hodgson made the sub after, you know, he came so after they scored their third goal, obviously to make it 3-2. Even though that was the case, I still think Jeffrey Schlupp, the reason I've given him a 6 is just because he came on, helped us to see the game out. But in terms of an attacking chance he's had, obviously he's scored 3 goals this season, so of course he's on good form in that respect. But he had a great chance to make it 3-3, but of course messed up his header, and that was all down to Patrick Van Aanholt putting in a great delivery from the set piece. And obviously Jeffrey Schlupp, who's obviously not known for his headering, but he couldn't quite direct the header on target. So I suppose he came off the bench to help us see the game out, and although he didn't necessarily have that much impact, the reason I'm going to give him a 6 is that, unlike quite a lot of our players, he actually had a chance in the game to score, to make it 3-3, which certainly would have made the game very interesting at that point. But ultimately he did mess up his header. Now the final 2 substitutions, they came on together, and that was Connor Wickham and Max Meyer. In terms of Connor Wickham, I'm going to give him a 6 because I do think, I talked about Ayew not holding up the ball well. I think that Connor Wickham came on and done exactly that. He was winning headers left, right and centre, which of course is something Ayew was doing. So already we had that improvement. And the fact that he actually controlled the ball very well to obviously supply Meyer for the assist for his goal as well was of course great to see. So the reason I've given Connor Wickham a 6 is just the impact he made off the bench, in the fact that he was winning headers, which was something we hadn't have done in the game previously, and the fact that he actually controlled the ball really well inside the box and obviously flicked the ball to Meyer, who of course Meyer scored. Now in terms of Max Meyer, obviously came off the bench, and certainly in terms of McCarver, who he came on for, he obviously was lacking a bit of creativity in the side, and albeit he had a few chances, he done alright in an offensive job. He wasn't necessarily as good and as creative as Max Meyer was, and I've talked already about the debate about that. But when Max Meyer came on, made a little bit of a difference, and albeit we went 4-2 down, when he came on. The fact that he was able to get on the end or the fact that he was able to run into the area and get on the end of Connor Wickham's sort of controlled ball was of course great to see. And albeit we still went on to lose the game, I'd rather lose the game 3-2 than 4-2. So of course it was nice for Max Meyer to get his first goal for the club, and actually it was quite a good strike, just enough power on it to get it past Alisson, but also the build-up play to that it was great as well. So the fact that we were passing it down that right hand side, and the fact that we got the ball into the box, Connor Wickham headed it down, controlled it and passed it to Myers. So the fact that they've got that link-up play already was quite good to see. And in terms of the game coming up, we obviously got Spurs in the cup. It will be nice to see someone like Connor Wickham and Benteke up top with maybe Max Meyer in behind, and maybe even Jeffrey Tubb out wide, because I do think these guys need to get a bit more game time. And as shown here with that sort of link-up play between Wickham and Meyer, they obviously seem to have some good connection. But like I've said already, all of the substitutions came on and had some sort of impact, so of course that's great to see. And albeit maybe they could have come on earlier, but nevertheless they came on once we were 3-2 down, so of course it was an uphill task anyway. But like I said already, very nice to see Max Meyer obviously get his first goal for Palace, and certainly does deserve the 7 I've given him. Now, in terms of just a small summary of the game, don't really want to dwell too much on it, but even though we lost the game 4-3, you've got to look at it and go, actually, I'm a lot more positive than I am negative about the game. And even though I lost, there were lots of positives and negatives to take. Now, in terms of the positives we can take from the game, I suppose Wilfried Zaha is one of them, in the fact that for the first time in a while, he looked to be the Wilf of old in terms of getting to the byline, crossing the ball in, using his pace to actually rip defenders to shreds. So the fact that he, in particular, looked to be back to his best was, of course, great to see. And you've just got to look back at the goal, our first goal, Andros Townsend, to make it 1-0. The fact that he just gave Milner absolutely roasted him to create our first chance, which is something we haven't necessarily seen him do this season because he's mainly been playing up front. So the fact that we've moved him to his natural position, and he's playing well there as well by actually doing what he does best, by actually getting out wide and crossing the ball in. So the fact that we saw that and saw a massive improvement in his performance, and finally something to show for his good offensive performances, was of course a positive you can take. And also another positive is actually, we finally got a centre forward in the box. You look back at our third goal to make it 4-3. That was a great goal in terms of the build-up play on the right-hand side. But the fact that we got the ball into the box to our centre forward, he headed it down to another player in the box, and obviously Max Meyer was able to score. So the fact that we finally, especially for that goal, the fact that we finally got centre forward in the box, we supplied the ball in the box to him, he was able to control it and get other players involved, and of course scored from that. So the fact that we've got someone who actually came off the bench in that centre forward role and actually made an impact, and also actually had a centre forward actually creating real goal scoring opportunities, obviously, which we finished to make it 4-3, was of course great to see. And of course the final sort of positive is the fact that James Tompkins, who of course I've talked about already, and the fact that he's been good from corners this season but hasn't necessarily got a goal to show for it. So the fact that him and Max Meyer, who of course has been very creative this season but hasn't got that elusive goal, so the fact that both these players in particular got their first of the season was of course great to see. Now, obviously, as much as it pains me, we might as well move on to a few negatives from the game. And the first one is just the fact that the goalkeeping situation, obviously it was quite unlucky that both Vicente Gaeta and Wayne Hennessy got injured, and it's very, it's very rare that both your goalkeepers get injured in the same game, but hey ho. And I suppose the only positive is that we had Julian Speroni, who's the third choice goalkeeper, and yes, he's a great servant to the club, and he came in last season and done a fairly decent job. But obviously, like I've talked about already, whether it's the fact that he hasn't played in a year, or whether it's just the fact that playing age, he's not as good as he used to be, whatever it was, albeit I'd normally be comfortable with him being the third choice, obviously he didn't necessarily have a great game there as well. So I suppose the negative is the fact that even though it's not really our own fault that our goalkeepers got injured, but that's obviously a negative we can take from the game. And obviously with Lucas Perry possibly coming in, I think he's had his medical today. With him coming in, it's obviously going to be fourth choice soon. So of course, hopefully, before Wayne or Vicente got injured, either Speroni needs to just slightly up his game and get back to his normal standard, or Lucas Perry has to come in and hit ground running and actually provide us with, basically with a very good option in goal, because it's not ideal having a situation like this where both of your main goalkeepers are injured, but hey ho, we've got to go through it. So hopefully we can sort something out, whether that be Julian Speroni getting back to his best, or whether it's Lucas Perry coming in, hitting the ground running, and actually proving to be quite a good keeper for us. And when you consider if Perry does play well, we possibly have the option to sign him for, I think it's 3.3 million. So the fact that we've got a goalkeeper here, very young, who could be good, we don't know yet, but could be good, that's obviously quite a good deal. So I suppose, it's yes, Speroni's a legend and he's still alright, but the fact that unfortunately he's not as good as our two first options in Vicente and Wayne was of course slightly disappointing. Now my final, or my second and final negative, is basically just about all the goals all put together. So the thing that is disappointing and negative is that even though we played so well defensively throughout the game, it was just a few mistakes that led to the goal. Obviously the first one took a massive deflection, so it's not too much blame, but I do think that Patrick Van Aanholt and Sacco, rather than them getting confused inside the box, they should have just cleared the ball up the field rather than sort of trying to pass it out. You know, Van Aanholt, normally you would clear it out for a throw-in, but rather than doing that, it was sort of a cross between a pass and a clearance, because it wasn't quite both, because it couldn't quite get the distance or the height. But nevertheless, he should have obviously cleared it more effectively. Obviously the second one, once again took a huge deflection, but you know, we really should be tackling Firmino on the edge of the area. You know, we shouldn't be giving him the space in the box, and that's what we done in the first half, and that's why we were so good in that first half. So maybe we should have done that more in the second. And obviously the third was just a poor attempt to push the ball over or try and punch it from Julian Speroni. Obviously, like I said already, he should either be looking to punch it forward or looking to catch it as well. And we know he's not the tallest, but that really is the two sort of viable options he should have in that side of the field. And obviously the fourth goal, you know, there was a handball in the build up to it. I think it was Robertson. The ball was going to go out for a throw, but he's flicked it just to keep the ball on. They've countered and he ended up scoring from that, and I think it was Mane doing that. So obviously you could say that the handball was disappointing, but ultimately it was too close to call, so I sort of understand why the referee didn't see it. But then on the other hand, we really should be closing Mane down. You know, just going back to that Firmino goal, we gave him too much space on the edge of the area, because yes, we were being tight in the middle of the park, but actually if you let someone cut inside, because the box is so crowded, your goalkeeper can't see it, you can't save it. So I suppose that's why we conceded that goal. But like I said already, obviously we were quite unlucky with the first two goals, and obviously the third and the fourth goal. Obviously the third one being that mistake by Speroni, and obviously the fourth one, handball in the build-up, albeit quite, you know, not really quite clear to see that. And of course Mane as well, we should really been closing him down. But for me, my final sort of closing part of this section of the podcast is that actually before the game, even though we beat City, we weren't really expecting too much from the game. So the fact that we came away from the game with such a good performance, and even though we lost the game by 4-3, the fact that we've still got more positives to take from the game as opposed to negatives really just goes to show how good our performance was. And also the fact that we've had a problem of not scoring enough goals this season. So the fact that we go to the league leaders like we did against Manchester City, who of course were second at that time, the fact that we've gone to the league leaders and actually scored 3 goals is absolutely brilliant. So really, yes, it doesn't necessarily prove that our goal drought or our lack of clinical edge in front of goal is gone, but it just goes to lengths to show that we've still got that quality in the side. It's just about unlocking it. But really for me, the thing that I want the team to take from this game is that yes, it was a little bit disappointing, but the fact that we put in such a good performance, we scored 3 goals, we were defensively fairly solid. So what we need to do now is just pick ourselves up and actually use the performance itself, use that good performance, and actually take it into the next game. You know, yes, it's against Spurs in the FA Cup, but if we take that positivity to that game with the injuries that Spurs has, then maybe we've got that chance to go through. And of course, win a game in the cup. You know, in midweek we've got a game against Southampton. So if we can win that game against Tottenham and then hopefully put in a good performance against Southampton, hopefully that momentum will keep building. But like I've said already, you know, good performance here, but quite unlucky not to come away with all 3 points, or even, you know, if we don't go on to win the game, at least come away with something from the game. So whichever way you look at it, we were quite unlucky not to come away with at least 1 or even 3 points. So now I'm going to move on to the Man of the Match award, but before we do that, I give you my Man of the Match, and who I thought the biggest influence in the game, and now I'm going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now over the last sort of few weeks or so, where our performances have been a bit hot and cold, you know, we've had some good games, you know, like the Man City game, and obviously the Cardiff game as well in particular was quite disappointing. So actually over the last sort of few weeks or so, and especially through December where we were on a good run of form, it was obviously quite difficult to pick players, mainly because our performances were good, so of course it was quite hard to narrow it down to 4 players. But also on the other hand, there were a few games where actually it was quite difficult, especially against Watford last weekend, quite difficult to pick out players. So once again, it was quite a positive result in the fact that even though we lost, we put in a good performance. So of course that makes my life a little bit more easier in the fact that even though we did lose, we can take loads of positives from the game, and actually our players, the majority of the players actually put in very good performances. So even though it was a good performance from the whole team, I had to leave a few players out. So people like MacArthur, Luka Milivojevic, people like this miss out, and that's not just because they weren't good enough to make it onto the shortlist. It's just the fact that because it was such a good team performance, I just think there were other players who really stood out for me. So the 4 players I've got on my shortlist is Aaron Wan-Bissaka, James Tompkins, Mamadou Sakho and Wilfried Zaha. So of course you can see already quite heavily weighted on defenders. But like I've said already, I've said in the player ratings, even though we conceded the 4 goals, and then the other one was a mistake, and one of them was quite a good goal attack. So aside from the goals, we were very good defensively, hence why I've got all of these players in him. So in terms of Aaron Wan-Bissaka, the reason I put him on here is, quite honestly, against Liverpool, the players they've got on the counter-attack, the fact that Wan-Bissaka, like he always is, he was alert, he was able to deal with every threat they threw at him, and the fact that he dealt with Mane and Keita in particular so well was of course great to see. And really I'm running out of words to describe his performances, but once again, impressive showing from him. So he's on the shortlist almost every week now, but that's just because of how good his defensive work is, especially with his tackling, but also the fact that he just deals with specific players so well. Obviously James Tompkins, there was one superb challenge in particular, which for that alone he deserves to be on the shortlist. That was one on Keita in the first half. But aside from that, I think as a whole, aside from the goals, I think he defended well. And the fact that he got a goal to make, to basically show for his good efforts recently from set pieces was of course great to see. And the fact that, considering all of the pressure we were under from Liverpool, the fact that he didn't make any mistakes, stayed calm, was of course great to see. Now Mamadou Sakho, for the same reasons, the fact that he was calm on the ball, defended well, essentially that's why I've put him on the shortlist as well. And you could argue either one of Sakho or Tompkins maybe should be replaced by someone like MacArthur or Luka, but I've put both of them in there because I do think as a defensive partnership, the 2 centre-backs done a superb job. And obviously the thing in particular, obviously Tompkins got the goal, so for that alone he deserves to be on the shortlist. But actually, the fact that Sakho, right on the edge of his area, had that calmness to actually drag back the ball and flick it in his own area whilst being put under pressure from 2 Liverpool players. The fact that he stayed calm and was able to get the ball out in a situation like that was the thing that was really impressive. So as was Tompkins' goal and the superb challenge he made on Keita, was wise on the shortlist. Sakho, for that little bit of skill, was also just being a rock in that first half and being solid after the break as well, was of course great to see. Now of course Wilfried Zaha, yes, he didn't get a goal in this game, but the fact that our opening goal came from him by actually running on the counter-attack, getting to the byline, putting a pin-perfect ball to Townsend to score. So for that alone he obviously deserves to be on the shortlist, but mainly just the fact that he got the assist, which he's long been waiting for, but just the fact that he got involved in all of our attacks, was looking to be one of our most active players in terms of going forward, running at the fullbacks, and it just goes to show, Milner got sent off because Zaha just, had him on toast for the whole game. So the fact that Zaha was running past him so freely by using his skill and pace obviously meant that Milner went off, and obviously the fact that Zaha seemed to be back to his old self, playing on the left or right hand side, just running at the opposition, was something that really did seem to help his play. But overall, I do think all of these players, and of course the notable mentions I've mentioned, do obviously deserve to be on the shortlist and deserve to be mentioned. But for me, I think there's only one clear winner, and that's just mainly because of just his attacking threat throughout the game. So congratulations, Wilf. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was a solid performance from you. And the thing that just gives to me, as opposed to the other players, is that yes, our defensive performance was good, but even though it wasn't necessarily their fault individually, when you concede 4 goals and you've got someone who played so well offensively and got such a good assist, I think that's the thing that really did weigh it for me. So Wilfried Zaha, congratulations on winning the award. But of course, notable mentions to MacArthur and Luka, and of course the 3 other players on our shortlist, Aaron Wan-Bissaka, James Tompkins and Mamadou Sakho. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Wilfried Zaha and Mamadou Sakho following the game.
Wilf, it was a great start to the match, but it slipped away from us and it was a crazy finish to the game. What did you make of it?
I'd say we're unlucky, but not really. I feel like we need to tighten up. Like some of the goals that we conceded today, it's just literally not good enough. You can't come to Anfield, score 3 goals and still lose. So it's not the same story where it's just like, yeah, we performed well and we're unlucky. We just need to be better, a lot better.
And it was a great assist for Andros's goal, and you had a lot of joy down that left-hand side. Were you pleased with your own performance?
Yeah, I'm happy, but I feel like it makes no difference if we lose. So yeah, I'm happy to get an assist. I'm happy that Andros managed to score, but at the end of the day we lost, so yeah, just behind us now.
As you say, it's tough to get over a defeat like that. How do you pick yourselves up as a group after playing so well but not coming away with any points?
You gotta just take the positives, really. That's all. We played really well today. We didn't just panic and think, oh yeah, we're going playing against a top team or whatever. We actually tried to express ourselves, so that's what you gotta take away. We were able to play against a top team. They're not at the top of the league for no reason. So you just gotta see that when we're playing well, you can see how dangerous we are, and just take it into the next game.
The ball just isn't dropping for us, isn't it? It's the difference of being at the top of the table and being at the bottom.
Yeah, obviously, being at the bottom, you're unlucky. Well, it's just like you just got to keep on going, really. Obviously, we've been in this predicament before, and it's a thing where if you just got the right mentality, you'll be fine, and we always are. So.
Back to Selhurst next, FA Cup, Spurs. Is it, after a result like that, is it nice to have a break from Premier League football and it's a cup tie all over in 90 minutes?
I feel like any game you want to win, there's still pressure. We're playing against Tottenham, we want to win it. So, obviously, after this performance, we're not happy that we lost or whatever, but we just got to take the positives and go into that game, and obviously, hopefully we can get a win, hopefully.
Mama, a disappointing result, but are there positives to take from that performance?
Of course, disappointed. Because when you give everything like we did for 95 minutes and you get back home with no points, yeah, of course, I am really disappointed.
How would you feel as a defender, or what do you say in a group when you play well as a team and as a defensive unit, but you concede goals? How would you deal with that?
It's football, you know. I think we have to think like a squad. When we score a goal, you know, the ball comes from our keeper, and when we concede the goal, the first defender is it's our striker. So yeah, we just have to think like a squad, like a team, and of course, it's sad, it's shame. But it's football, you know. Now we have to look forward, and we have to work hard for the next game.
We caused them problems throughout the match, and it used to be the way you pick the ball up and pass out the back. Is that something you work on as a unit?
I think for Liverpool it was one of the difficult games they had this season at Anfield, because we showed a really strong team, really strong squad against them. But yeah, we just try to listen what the manager wanted to us to do, and I think we did it well. And yeah, we try to play from the back to try to put our striker in the best situation we can do.
We have a break from Premier League football now and got the FA Cup next, Spurs at Selhurst Park. Is it nice to have a break from the Premier League after a result like that?
Really, I don't think about the break right now. I'm just disappointed, and that's it.
Roy, that game had a bit of everything, but ultimately ended in disappointment for us. How do you sum that up?
Yeah, pretty much like that. I think that it was a performance of which I'm proud. I think the players should be proud of their performance. I think that they did exceptionally well. I think it's cruel that they didn't get at least 1 point from the game, if not all three. And I think it's cruel for Julian, who stepped in at such short notice and, you know, took on such a difficult task, that his was a goalkeeping error which cost us a third goal and, you know, prevented us from getting that point. But the fact is, it's so unusual to lose two goalkeepers in one game, and for Julian to come in and play here after 13 months without a game was a tremendous ask on his part, and I thought he was doing extremely well, and he'll be disappointed about the cruelty of the game, which will see him in headlines as the man who made the mistake which cost us the point.
The game plan in the first 45 minutes really seemed to nullify Liverpool. How happy are you with that first half performance?
Very happy. I was very happy with everything, really. I mean, the two goals that put them in the lead were both very fortunate goals. The first one in particular, you know, it's a speculative 45 metre shot which hits James McCarthy and bounces up in the air to a marginally onside Salah to get one and equalise for him. And the second one again was quite a clear deflection from a shot which otherwise would probably have been saved. But for the players to come back from that, to accept that, we don't deserve this, but we're going to get going again, and we're going to try and make sure we get ourselves back on level terms, despite the fact that Liverpool have had the best of the game in terms of ball possession. To come back in and get the 2-2, I thought was an excellent performance, and then the 3-2 goal, that should really have deflated people more than it did, but they kept going, and it was really Liverpool hanging on when they got the fourth goal, and the fourth goal, although it makes no difference saying it now, was one which should have been disallowed because there was a clear handball. But we've had that before. We lost at Middlesbrough in a League Cup tie to a clear handball. We conceded a goal against Arsenal to a clear handball. So it seems to be people missing clear handballs against us is one of those things which I'll have to live with.
And as you mentioned, it's a cruel result. How would you pick up the players after putting in a performance like that and scoring 3 goals at a team like Liverpool?
I don't think that'll be too difficult. I think that when they settle down, they'll be still disappointed that we go away pointless, but I think also they'll know that was a really good performance, and that this is the type of football we're capable of. I think we've shown it all season, to be honest. I think we've been an entertaining team, and I think the points total we have is way below what the team performances have deserved. But we also know that if you keep giving the performances, the results will come, and we just have to take the positives from this game, of which there are many, and make certain that we put them to good use in the matches to come.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Wilfried Zaha and Mamadou Sakho had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Liverpool. But make sure to come back next week for my post-match review of the game against Tottenham in the FA Cup. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.